Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernAppalachianHerbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernAppalachianHerbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs. Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Boy, it's been a very eventful week. You may remember from last week's show that I finally spoke out on my opinions on vaccine mandates. And I was afraid that I would lose a good deal of my audience. And I stated that in the podcast. There just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of tolerance for free speech, or shall we say, differing opinions anymore. And much to my surprise, there's been an outpouring of support. Some people say, I don't agree with everything you say, but I think it's important to hear a different perspective, a different voice. And I love what you do with herbs. And, what more can I ask than that? I don't expect everybody to agree with me. I don't want everybody to agree with me. It would be a very boring, miserable world that would probably be determined for destruction if everyone thought and felt and believed the same thing, because no one could ever point out when something was going wrong. That critical thinking is actually, that's a pretty darn important thing. Well, one of the people that got in touch, really surprising. I was sitting there working on another project, and an email popped in from Frank Salvato. Now, those of y'all who are talk radio junkies like me, I have been since I was about 20 years old or so. Um, you may remember the name Frank Salvato. You may be familiar with it. You may remember him from being on TV a lot in the 2000s. You may remember he had a very popular website called New Media Journal. He used to be on O'Reilly's show a lot, and he's done a whole lot of radio. He has a very popular podcast, and he still does radio, but this podcast is, I think, his personal vehicle these days. And so, anyway, it's called the Underground USA podcast. And apparently, his girlfriend, her name is CJ, he says she's a big fan of my show and actually owns all three of my books. So, first of all, big shout out, big thank you to CJ for making this happen. He said that she basically told him, you have to listen to this podcast, and made sure that he listened to my show from last week. And he got in touch and interviewed me, and it was just fun. It went really well. We had a good conversation. We talked a lot about herbs and foraging and such in the first half of the show. The second half of the show, we got more into politics. And I highly recommend his show. His girlfriend CJ is an herbalist and a retired nurse, and he is a strong interest in herbs as well. And I'll read you the description of the show. He titled it "Changing Your Perception on Holistics, Herbalism, and American Individualism." He says, if you thought that all those who are into herbs and holistic medicine are firmly ensconced on the left side of the aisle, you haven't met Judson Carroll. Introduced to his podcast by my girlfriend CJ, and after listening specifically to episode 52, it was apparent that he had to be introduced to the Underground USA audience. It also became apparent that the world of herbalism and holistics is actually a gateway to independence. And I think that is where we really kind of connect on things. You know, a gateway to independence. Um, I tell, well, we share the same philosophy on government not always being a good thing. Now, hey, that's heresy to say that these days, right? But you remember when there used to be bumper stickers you see on the vehicles of hippies, and it said, "If you think you can trust the government, ask any Indian." Well, it's just true today as it was when those bumper stickers were on the cars driven by liberals, and Ronald Reagan said the scariest words in the English language are, "We're from the government, we're here to help." I mentioned on his show the old story about Stalin that was told in a Nero Wolfe novel, but you probably may have seen it in other sources, I'm sure. Stalin takes a bird and plucks out every feather and then holds it in the palm of his hand and says, "See how it's grateful now for the warmth of my hand." That is the negative potential of government. No, government doesn't do that all the time. And, I'm not saying embrace anarchy or something. What I'm saying is the more they do for us, or the more they take away our ability to do for ourselves, the more we become dependent on that system. And if we haven't learned anything in the course of this pandemic, it's that our government has absolutely no idea what it's doing. But it can certainly use the force of law to make a lot of bad decisions and make other people comply with them. I mean, we've got supply chain problems. We've got inflation going through the roof. We've got uh, fentanyl overdoses, borders out of control, terrible catastrophe in Afghanistan. I can keep going down the list, but it's getting very hard to name one thing government does well. Uh, Honestly, what in your life, where do you interact with government when you think, wow, that just really, it was such a clean, good transaction. I feel good about it. Like they seem to care about me and they were efficient. Well, you know what? I just got my 2019 tax return in the mail. It wasn't even that much, 2019 showed up in October of 2021. I ordered an excellent, very hard to find herb book from a fella in Alaska. It went from Alaska to Seattle. It takes that route. It gets to Greensboro, North Carolina. For no apparent reason, they sent it back to Seattle. Seattle sends it back to Greensboro. Greensboro sends it to Seattle. Seattle sends it to Anchorage, Alaska. Anchorage sends it to Seattle. Seattle sits on it for a month and a half. It's made it to Greensboro again. Over 2 months just to send a priority mail package with a tracking number across the United States. No, things aren't working. From schools that are just horrible to a medical system that's falling apart. And if you learn to feed yourself, to care for yourself, your own medical needs, you can be independent. And I really want to stress this one point. These vaccine mandates are kicking in, and 20, 30% of the population may be without a job. You're talking, they may put them on unpaid leave for 6 years, meaning they can't even get unemployment, or say that they quit and weren't fired just because they didn't comply with the mandate. I don't really care what your political views are on that, but that's a huge swath of the population that's going to lose their income, they're going to lose their health insurance, and they better learn to feed themselves, be their own herbal practitioners, their own clinical herbalists, use home remedies within the family, or they're going to go bankrupt. So, yes, this is a matter of independence. And the one tip I will give you is that if you want the independence of being able to say, well, like Johnny Paycheck, the old Johnny Paycheck song, take this job and shove it. If you don't agree with the values or morals of your boss or whatever, or you want new opportunities, you better learn to be independent. And a big part of that independence is, well, getting out of debt. The more debt you have, the fewer options you have. The more debt you have, the more you are almost enslaved to a boss, to a mortgage company, a bank, to you name it. So I would encourage everyone not only to look into herbs, but to think about financial independence as well. So that's enough on that subject. I just check out his show, Underground USA. I thought it was really good, and it was fun. And he said he'd like to have me back sometime. So hopefully this will happen again, and I'll keep you all apprised of that. Got another email, and this one was very supportive, very nice, from a lady that again says she doesn't agree with me all the time, but thinks it's important to have differing opinions and have independent voices. Her name is Opal. Well, asked me about a plant called wild quinine. Okay, so Miss Opal, I've done what you asked. I'm going to see what I can tell you about this herb. It is not one that is commonly used in the modern day. It is not an herb that is used basically at all outside of the United States or North America, but it is very similar to boneset, which is a European herb. And it could be a very important herb in this time where we need antivirals and febrifuge herbs that can help bring down a fever and immune system builders. And so I looked at this herb and I'm going to tell you what I found on it because I had to do a lot of research and a lot of old books. I was not finding this in modern sources. The one modern entry, the one current entry I found on it was the Plants for a Future website, Plants for a Future database. That's naturalmedicinalherbs.net. And if you followed my stuff for a while, you know that when I'm looking for what the current concept, the current suggested use for an herb is, this is the first place I go. Second place I go when I'm looking for dosage and interaction is usually the physician's desk reference for herbal medicine, and it's not even listed in there. So that's how hard it is to kind of find modern information about this. But wild quinine is Parthenium integrifolium. Now, if you're familiar with boneset, you may know that it shares one of those names. Now, they're both in the composite family, but they're not as closely related as you might otherwise think. They are related, however. But medicinal use of wild quinine, according to this site, says a poultice made from fresh leaves is applied to burns. The root is used in the treatment of inflammation of the urinary passage and kidneys, amenorrhea, and as a lithotripsy. The flowering tops are used as a substitute for quinine in the treatment of intermittent fevers. One study suggests that the use of the plant might stimulate the immune system. So obviously you can see where we're going with this. It is like quinine made from the cinchona bark, Peruvian bark as they used to call it because it was introduced by the natives of Peru to the Jesuits. So turning again to another source, I found in Peterson's Field Guide to Eastern and Central Medicinal Plants. And I think I've recommended this before. If you are interested at all in finding medicinal plants in the wild, you need this book. They have the one for the Eastern Central, and then they have one for the Western part of the states. They're fantastic. I don't know if they have them for Canada, but look into that. And their foraging guides are really good too. It again has a short entry. It says that the Catawba Indians, which is interesting because the Catawbas are right here in North Carolina, and I got a lot of family connections to them. Catawba's poultice leaves on fresh burns. Flowering tops were once used for intermittent fevers, like in malaria. Root was used as a diuretic for kidney and weak bladder ailments and gonorrhea. One study suggests wild quinine may stimulate the immune system, and they said it may cause dermatitis or allergies. Now, those are the only two modern references I can find. I went to King's Medical Dispensatory of 1898. This is what the doctors and the pharmacists were using 123 years ago or so. And it's available online. If you Google King's American Dispensatory, you'll find it. I believe it's at henriette'sherbs.com. She has just a lot of really good resources. Now, King's in 1898 included all three of these similar plants under one heading. They had Tanacetum, Parthenium, Hysterophorus and Parthenium integrifolium, which is what we're talking about. So they put it in the same category as feverfew, saying that the plants could be used interchangeably. Now, feverfew has a long history of use in Europe for reducing fevers, and it makes sense. The plants are related, and they're both very bitter, and if they work in a similar way, then Kings would have put them under a similar heading. In fact, the other name for this plant, for Parthenium integrifolium, other than wild quinine, is American feverfew. This plant, also known by the name nephritic plant, liquid preparations of the drug possess an agreeable orange-like odor. It's a diuretic. Cold infusion of the root in a wine glass full dose, 3 or 4 times a day, will be found very beneficial in heat of the urine, strangury, dysuria, gonorrhea, gravel. It's basically all issues of the urinary tract and diseases of the kidneys and bladder generally. It is highly recommended by practitioners in these diseases. Likewise, said to be an aromatic bitter stimulant. The flowering tops have been used as an antipyretic. 2 fluid ounces of their infusion have no unpleasant influence on the nervous system and are said to be equal to 20 grains of sulfite of quinine. So again, we're saying it is very similar to quinine. And in King's, they're saying a cold infusion. They're meaning a cold tea. I mean, you're not going to take a wine glass of, a tincture of any herb. Uh, that would probably be quite dangerous if you did that. Now, the other resource I found that was very interesting comes from, one of my absolute favorite books. It's Resources of the Southern Fields and Forests, written in 1869. And as I have explained before, during this time, the South was under blockade, and so the Confederacy hired a French botanist to come find native substitutes for all the medications they were relying upon as imports, and foods and textiles and all kinds of stuff. If you live in the South, and if you can find a copy of this book, it's over 700 pages, and it's probably one of the best investments you'll ever make, even though it was written in 1869. In fact, it may be more relevant today, or if we had a huge market crash or a solar flare or some kind of disruption, this would be a book that you would not regret having on your shelf. He says Parthenium integrifolium, or the wild quinine. He says it grows in dry soils in mountains of Alabama and northward. And that's also Catawba territory. Recommended by Dr. Mason Holton as a powerful antipyretic. Now, what does that mean? We talked about in the last passage the malarial fevers. Malaria caused fevers that would come every 2, 3, or 4 days. They were called periodic fevers. So that was the main use of both the regular quinine and this wild quinine plant, was to prevent those periodic fevers. The flowering tops, which have an intensely bitter taste, are the parts used, and 2 ounces of them in a dried state, given in the form of infusion, are thought by Dr. Holton to be equivalent to 20 grains of sulfate of quinine. 30 successive cases of periodic fevers were cured by this remedy without any unpleasant effect upon the nervous system. And that was documented in various pharmaceutical journals. I won't try to read them all right now. So you can see that this herb, which you could probably grow in your garden, certainly a whole lot more easily than you could grow a cinchona tree, is an alternative to quinine. We've been seeing a lot of quite dubious, to put it mildly, so-called alternative to quinine remedies made out of citrus peels. This, I think, would be a far more effective alternative. And you could probably get some seeds if you can find them somewhere. Right now, yeah, the flowers would probably still be on. Maybe you can collect some seeds, but you could probably get them growing in pots in the house this winter, or set them out in the spring in your garden. And next time some viral epidemic comes along, you've got one more very effective tool in your herbal medicine cabinet. So thank you, Opal, for giving me this suggestion and asking me to research this. It's been very interesting. So let's get to our plant identification of the week. It's I figured after doing that kind of long entry, I'd do a real simple one. Prickly pear cactus. Now, everybody knows what a cactus is. The succulent plant with spines on it that'll stick in you and be most unpleasant. There's so many cactuses throughout North America, but the one we're going to talk about is prickly pear. Prickly pear is so very common throughout the southeastern United States because it was an important food source when the settlers came here. You will see it at old home sites. I mean, you'll just see these huge stands of prickly pear. Well, if you ever go into a Hispanic grocery store at the end or whatever, you'll see they have nopales. Nopales are these same cactus pads, de-spined. They eat them as food, and they're a wonderful addition. I mean, like grilled nopales on a taco with some smoked meat, absolutely delicious. And but mainly they were planted around here, not so much for the pads, but for the fruit. Fruit turns red and then purple when it's really ripe, and they're actually ripe right now. If you want to go out and look for some, they are about the size of a kiwi, and they're smooth, but they are covered in fine spines, okay? Fine cactus spines. So what I would normally do is either put on a heavy glove, but more often wrap a towel around my hand and take a knife in the other and just cut them into a bucket. Bring them home, take a plumber's torch and burn the spines off. If you have a good gas stove with some tongs, you can do the same thing. I find the torch works a little bit better. They vary in flavor from somewhat bland with a little fruity taste to improved varieties that have a really nice taste. It is somewhat like kiwi. It is somewhat in the nicer, in the more improved varieties, somewhat more like a passion fruit. Uh, they can be crushed through a fruit cone or anything else to remove the seeds, and you get a bright red, like a pomegranate color juice from that. No, it's actually a little more pinky. There's a little more pink hue to it, and you can make a wine out of that. And some people call that wine dragon's blood. So you can have a lot of fun with this cactus, and you can also crush it and add a little sugar and salt. Pop it in the freezer and take it out every now and then. And kind of scrape it with a fork, put it back in. You can make a granita out of it. So very good. But herbally, these plants are very interesting because those pads, taking the spines off, make an excellent poultice for wounds. This is one that, especially throughout the Southwest, the herbalists use a ton of different cactuses for wounds, for infected wounds, for snake bites, for spider bites, for drawing poison or infection out of a wound. The the gel-like liquid within the cactus can be used almost identically to aloe. You can put it on burns. You can put it on swords. It has antiseptic properties. And yeah, I mean, it's just an excellent plant. But also, eating those Nepalis can help balance out blood sugar spikes, keep the highs and lows from going so extreme. And, if taken in time and eaten regularly, could probably help prevent or correct insulin resistance. So very important plant to know. And, I think they're absolutely delicious. It's one of those that I look forward to foraging about this time every year. October means I go get a bushel of oysters and a bucket full of prickly pear cactuses. And in a couple of weeks, it's going to be persimmon. So that's our plant for the day. Now let's get into some herbal first aid. Herbs for wound healing. Now, this is one of the places where herbal medicine is heads and shoulders above Western medicine. Uh, or average, just regular first aid for regular Western medicine. They can clean a wound, they can disinfect a wound. Yeah, if you use Neosporin, it may heal a little quicker or something. But as far as actually speeding the healing of a wound, there are various UV lights, there are various treatments for the average person just going to their medicine cabinet or flipping through their first aid book, you're kind of out of luck. I mean, basically, you're just cleaning that wound out, stopping the bleeding, letting it heal on its own. In herbal medicine, we have herbs that promote healing, and they've been documented as far back as ancient Greece and used for thousands of years. Many of these herbs were carried by soldiers into battle, and some I've spoken about in the previous 2 weeks when we were talking about wounds to stop bleeding, and herbs to stop bleeding, and herbs to disinfect wounds. And two or three of the most, interchangeable that would cross these categories would be plantain. Plantain is not just antiseptic, but it also promotes healing. Bugle, that's a Juga repens, one of my absolute favorite herbs, was carried into battle by soldiers for this very purpose, disinfecting, stopping the bleeding, healing wounds. And calendula, calendula is just an excellent herb for the skin, and it's also helps heal wounds. But by far, okay, by far the biggest one is comfrey. Comfrey, the I'll just read what I wrote about it in my new book, Herbal Medicine for Preppers, Homesteaders, and Permaculture People, which, if you don't have a copy of, please buy it because it's an excellent book, in my humble opinion, and it's getting incredible reviews. Really, it's people are really happy with it. Yeah, I think it really fills a niche, and again, it's that niche that's going to become so important with people losing their jobs and supply chain disruptions and all that. It gives you what you need to take care of yourself and your family with home remedies. It gives you the knowledge. All right, so comfrey, that is Symphytum officinale, is the undisputed king of wound healing or vulnerary herbs. That's the actual official herbal term is vulnerary. The Old English common name for comfrey was nipbun. Comfrey contains allantonin, a substance which has recently come under scrutiny. Essentially, comfrey causes the propagation of protein or cell growth. For centuries, it has been used to heal wounds, broken bones, and for joint damage. It is a very powerful herb for tissue repair. However, it encourages the growth of all cells, and that includes cancer cells. For this reason, it should not be used internally by people who have tumors, cancerous, or precancerous conditions. I would encourage you to do your own research in comfrey and to take the caveat that Dr. Jones gives under advisement. Dr. Jones always reminds us that the government studies on comfrey gave incredibly huge quantities to baby rats, the equivalent of gallons of highly concentrated comfrey tea to humans. Dr. Jones says this study proved only that nearly drowning baby rats in comfrey could encourage cancer growth. So, as he always says, don't give comfrey to baby rats. That said, a normal dose of comfrey is actually less carcinogenic or cancer causing than the alcohol in one can of cheaply made beer. The government says it's okay to use topically, but not internally. I use comfrey internally. Every herbalist I know uses comfrey internally. Comfrey has been used for thousands of years internally. You will have to make your own decisions. That's what I wrote. I think if you have a history of cancer, if you have a concern of cancer, if you have any reason, I'm not going to advise you use it internally. Externally, you should be just fine. But do your own research and make your own decisions. A lot of people use it not only internally, but regularly and in fairly large doses, like Susan Weed and her herbal infusions. It's one of her regulars that she takes and just, drinks regularly. How effective is comfrey for healing wounds? Well, I'll give you two examples. Recently, I was listening to a lecture by an herbalist named Seven Song. Well, obviously that isn't his real name. He specializes in first aid for rainbow gatherings where they give people tribal names and street protests. So yes, he's a man of the left and way out where the buses don't run in that regard. However, he's an extremely knowledgeable herbalist. He's a good teacher and operates a free clinic where he treats all manners of conditions with herbs. Uh, really good guy. And, like I said, you don't have to agree with someone's politics to learn from them. That's a lesson a lot of people need to learn these days. But Seven Song cautioned that in treating deep cuts and puncture wounds and infected wounds, you should wait to use comfrey. He said that if the wound is not completely disinfected, the comfrey could close the wound so quickly, trapping infection under the skin. Now, that is a powerful wound healer. A couple years ago, I totally blew up my knee. I was under far too heavy a load and put all my weight on one leg at an awkward angle. The knee bent in half sideways. I dropped everything, fell to the ground, snapped it back into place. I tried to stand, but it buckled under any weight. A neighbor saw me trying to crawl up the driveway and lent me a hand to the house. My knee turned almost black, and swelled up to about the size of a volleyball. It was really bad, serious damage. I treated myself using mainly turmeric and black pepper for inflammation, and some aspirin and comfrey. I walked with a cane for a couple of months, but was soon able to do light rehab. And it was probably a good year before I could do squats in the gym, but it did heal up. It healed up just fine. I mean, when a cold front comes in, yeah, I get a little ache in there, but it's as strong as it was before the injury. A friend of mine injured his knee in a similar way about the same time, but he went to the emergency room. After lots of medications and surgery and physical therapy and regular doctor visits to have a needle stuck in his knee and drain the fluid off, which is incredibly painful, he was no better and probably even worse. I recommended comfrey to him, and within 2 weeks, he was much improved and going back to the gym. So that is the power of comfrey. Just remember, use with care, and comfrey does like to spread. So if you plant it, plant with care, and only use American comfrey. Do not use or European comfrey. Only use the real comfrey. Aficionados. Do not use Russian comfrey, because Russian comfrey is the comfrey that the government study that said causes. There has never been a study that says that the real traditional used comfrey is the same. That's true with a lot of herbs, a lot of herbs. Mullein is another common weed in pretty much every part of the country. Mullein is generally used as a lung herb. It's expectorant and soothing to the lungs and taken as a tea or tincture or even smoked. However, mullein is also an excellent wound herb. Mullein is anti-inflammatory, antiseptic, and wound healing. Mullein is anodyne, meaning it helps reduce pain. Mullein leaves are something like large furry tobacco leaves, if you look at them, especially when the plant's, just growing in the spring. This makes mullein a natural bandage and an excellent poultice, but it can also be used as a tea, a wash, or a tincture. Mullein poultice is said to be drawing, which makes it helpful for bites, stings, and infections. And mullein in oil, mullein flower, actually the flowers of mullein infused in oil, is antibacterial. St. John's wort. Now this is using St. John's wort oil. It's just an infused oil. Is not only antiseptic and antiviral, but is also wound healing. St. John's wort has the unique property of helping heal nerve injuries when taken internally as a tincture, tea, or capsule, and massaged into the affected area as an oil or wash. Could be very important in this day and age when we have so many nerve injuries, traumatic injuries from war. Wild rose is, well, basically all roses. We just say wild rose, the dog rose, whatever wild rose grows in your area is going to be stronger than any hybridized rose. So I would not go with any hybridized rose. Stick with wild roses, maybe some of the old-fashioned tea roses. But it's generally used as an astringent and anti-inflammatory, but it's also useful as a vulnerary or wound healing herb. Violets, most, if not all, members of the violet family contain salicin, which is natural aspirin. Violets are wound healing and soothing to the skin. Most are edible and some are delicious. Violets have many medicinal uses. Some may cause stomach upset if eaten in quantity. So check a good field guide or plant ID app for your area. Be sure of the identification. And again, I have to say, I'm talking actual violets, not African violets, which are totally different plant. Don't mix the two up. Golden Alexander's is traditionally been used as a vulnerary. Be toxic if taken internally. It is also in the same family as some very poisonous herbs that look similar, and that can include the deadly poison hemlock. So for this reason, let's kind of keep that as a last resort to be used with great caution, and be sure it actually is golden Alexander's, and don't use it internally or on broken skin or anything, because poison hemlock is, one of the most poisonous herbs known to man. Aloe vera gel from the inside of a plant works as a protective coat over a wound, helping to keep infection out while keeping the tissue soft. It is astringent and anti-inflammatory. The inner pulp of prickly pear cactus heads may be used similarly. That's actually very similar to Neosporin in how it speeds up the healing of a wound. Just kind of keeps it moist and protected while being antibacterial, anti antibiotic. Gotu kola it can be used internally to encourage healing. It also reduces inflammation and is a slightly sedative tonic. It's a very useful herb. Turmeric and its relative ginger, and presumably this would also include galangal, they're all three in the same family, may help wound healing by reducing inflammation. Turmeric may also have an effect on the production of collagen, which aids in wound healing. Turmeric should always be combined with black pepper and a natural fat or oil when taken internally, so the liver can process it better and the body can better absorb it. Garlic and onions, of course. Garlic and onions aid in wound healing, especially when combined with honey. Honey is a natural antiseptic, so are garlic and onions. And honey also has wound healing properties. So even though it's sticky and unpleasant, ground any of the allium family, we're talking garlic, we're talking onions, shallots, leeks, ramps, you name it, chives, ground up, mixed into honey, put on the wound with a bandage over it so you don't get sticky, nasty, stinky onion stuff all over the place. That's been used for centuries, thousands of years. This used to be one of the primary treatment for soldiers wounded in battle before modern medicine. Salt water is also wound healing. Nearly every seaside culture on Earth has held the belief that salt water and sunlight is an excellent treatment for wounds. Many traditional healers will say that it is due to the high levels of natural minerals in seawater. However, most doctors today would point out that the water is apt to be contaminated, either with pollution or even natural bacteria that can cause infection. You have these bacterial blooms sometimes. Personally, I never hesitate to soak my wounds in the water while fishing or just enjoying the beach. I find that the salt water, the ocean breeze, the intense sunlight cleanses and dries in minor wounds faster than anything. That's if I can keep the flies off. Those black flies bite and can cause infection and just be an absolute nuisance. So, it may be safer to use table salt or Epsom salt or another mineral salt and just, dilute in salt water and do a soak or a wash at home if you want to try salt water, just to be on the safe side. So, y'all, that about covers it for this week. We covered a lot of ground as usual, and get out there and have a great week. Beautiful, nice, crisp, cool fall weather, and we got some snow coming in. So it's winter time on the mountain already, even though it is fall. Have a good one, and I will talk with you next week. The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.